That's what the Nazi regime, known as the federal government, does.
Did the U.S. actually land on the moon? Has anyone actually ever been to the moon?
Never seen it in a human being before. I've only seen it in rogue CIA agents.
Bart Sibrel is the author of Moon Man and the only living person to ever be punched in the face by a real-life astronaut, Buzz Aldrin, for questioning whether or not Buzz actually ever went to the moon. You see, Bart had in his possession real-life proof that the USA never went to the moon, and that we actually never even left Earth orbit, but faked the entire thing. Desperate to get a hold of that information, the CIA chased Bart down, drugged him, illegally arrested him, and threw him in an insane asylum to keep him quiet. But now, he's telling his story on popular podcasts like Joe Rogan and the PBD podcast.
The government wants people to think that you're just far out there, that you're crazy.
Take it from a filmmaker, that is an electrical light that's really close, which means they're not on the moon, they're on Earth.
What is your level of certainty that no nation on Earth has ever been to the moon?
The most historic event in human history isn't putting a man on the moon, it's faking it.
Hi there, and welcome to Rolle With Steve. Before we get started, a quick favor. If you enjoyed these conversations, hit that subscribe button and join our community. I've got a bold goal to grow this channel to 10,000 subscribers by the end of 2025. And together, I know we can make that happen. So I appreciate your support. My commitment to you is to create new content weekly with talented guests that will help you grow personally and professionally. Also, drop a comment with your thoughts. I read every single one. If you find value here, a quick like or share helps others find the show. Thanks, and let's roll into today's episode. Did the U.S. actually land on the moon? Has anyone actually ever been to the moon? You've made so much content around this, but I want to start by asking you, what is your level of certainty that no nation on Earth has ever been to the moon?
Well, you could say 400% certainty because we have 4 times the proof that would prove it in a court of law that they did not go to the moon. If it weren't for people's emotional or religious attachment to their team winning the Super Bowl, putting a man on the moon, people would see the lie for what it is. I'll give you the 4 proofs really simple. Just go to Sibrel.com. That's S as in Sam, I, B as in boy, R-E-L, Sibrel.com. On the homepage, there's a 3-minute video called The Moon Landing Fraud in 3 Minutes, where you can see a photograph if you go out in sunlight, your front yard, your parking lot at lunch, and look at 2 people standing, 2 trees, 2 telephone poles, and their shadows, if they're lit by the sun, will always run parallel and never intersect. And you can see a picture that they claim was taken on the moon where the shadows intersect at 90 degrees from objects 5 feet apart. Take it from a filmmaker, that is an electrical light that's really close, which means they're not on the moon, they're on Earth. So you can prove the moon landing fraud with 1 photograph because the shadows are intersecting at 90 degrees when they should be parallel if in fact it were taken with sunlight like they claim. So there you go. Then we have an eyewitness who, as he was dying, confessed that he participated in the moon landing fraud, which was filmed at Cannon Air Force Base in 1968. Then we uncovered classified footage that 2 NBC News directors agree wholeheartedly proves the crews never left Earth orbit. We have a tape of the crew of Apollo 11 using a 1-foot model of the Earth, pretending that it's floating in space and they're looking back at the Earth halfway to the moon. The lights come up, it's a 1-foot model, and they're still in Earth orbit, and we have a 3rd track of audio of the CIA telling them to fake a 4-second radio delay to make it appear they're beyond Earth orbit. So there's proof right there. And then we have logic. Today, with 50 years better technology, the farthest that NASA can send an astronaut into space is only 1,000th the distance to the moon. So how could they go to the moon on the first attempt with 1/1,000th the computing power of a cell phone, when today, with 5 decades better technology, they can only go 1,000th the distance to the moon? So Lindbergh flew across the Atlantic in 1927. He flew approximately 3,000 miles. Imagine 50 years later, right? What would that be, 1977, and no one can fly an airplane across the Atlantic, despite there being 747s at the time, and the most advanced airplane in 1977 can only fly 3 miles instead of 3,000. That's what we're expected to believe. Atomic bombs blew up for the first time in 1945, and 10 years later, they were 1,000 times more powerful. So if they could go to the moon on the first attempt with 1 millionth the computing power of a cell phone, we would have been on Mars 10 years later. We'd be in another solar system by now, and there'd be bases all over the moon. You cannot have greater technology in the past and in the future. Is there any technology, any cell phone, any computer, any microwave oven, anything from 1969 that's better, can do more back then than it can today? It's impossible. The truth is right there, and people don't want to see it because they don't want to admit that their team cheated to win the Super Bowl.
There's the one criticism that people have that I want to ask you about, where they say, well, okay, we can all admit some of this footage is faked, but is it even remotely possible that we went to the moon and then we just faked the footage the same way the Russians faked the footage of their cosmonaut being in space? Is there a remote possibility of that for you, or is that not in the realm of possibility?
Well, it's illogical. You either go or you fake it. You don't do both, right? If you ask an AI, are the moon landings real, the publicly available AI, it'll say, of course, they're real. If you ask it who was the 16th president, it'll say Abraham Lincoln. But was it there in 1860 on the ground with sensors at polling stations? How does it know that Abraham Lincoln was the 16th president? Because it was programmed to say that. It was programmed to say that men walked on the moon. But the smartest AI, not available to the public, that was being shown off by Google, multiple AIs hooked up together at a big AI conference in Moscow, where VIPs like Vladimir Putin were there. Various teams were allowed to play with it for a couple of days. One had it write a symphony, one had it write a novel, which took about 2 seconds, and one took advantage of its deep fake detector program, which has never been wrong. You can show it a video of Trump or Biden, it can tell you in 1 second whether it's a deep fake. So the team showed it photographs from the surface of the moon from the unmanned Chinese probes from 2018 that says these pictures are really on the surface of the moon. Then it was shown pictures from the Nixon administration's Apollo program. It said every single one of them had a fake backdrop, that the soil was real to a certain point, and then the pixels didn't line up geographically, and therefore it's a fake backdrop. It just said, the smartest AI in the world just said the pictures are fake. So they have a problem. How can we say the pictures are fake, but we went to the moon anyway? The fact is, people back in 1969, 10% of the public thought that they were going to fake the moon landing. So the last thing you would do if you really went would be to fake any of it. And they didn't really care, because during the alleged live landing, all that people saw on their TV was an animation that said simulation at the bottom. It was like a radio play. Hey, we're 10 feet above the ground and 5 feet. No one actually saw the landing for real. And then next thing you know, they pop it open. It's a static shot that they deliberately degraded in quality. And we have an eyewitness who says he saw that exact film being filmed at Cannon Air Force Base a year beforehand. So they did fake the moon landing, and now that the AI has proven the pictures are fake, geometry, mathematics prove the pictures are fake, they're trying to scramble and say they really went to the moon anyway. We have live video footage of them in Earth orbit that's dated 2 days into the flight, where they lie and say they're halfway to the moon, and the lights come up and you see the Earth outside the window. They're still in Earth orbit. And then there's a third track of audio of the CIA telling them only to answer NASA after 4 seconds go by to create a fake radio delay as if they're halfway to the moon. Now, when I showed that to 2 NBC News directors, they practically fainted. They agreed it proved 100% that they never left Earth orbit. And of course, they all had identical equipment. So if one Apollo craft can't leave Earth orbit, none of them can. And they were threatened by the U.S. government not to broadcast it. Now, today, Elon Musk just said it's going to take 15 rockets to fuel up to a space station to have enough fuel to leave Earth orbit to go to the moon. Von Braun said the same thing. We have a clip at Sibrel.com. Von Braun saying the largest rocket that mankind can build can only achieve Earth orbit. You see that? And now a TED Talk says it may take up to 24 rockets of fuel to leave Earth orbit. And then we have a clip of NASA saying that the radiation field that you'd have to go through to reach the moon, that the technology necessary to survive that trip has not been invented yet. I mean, I don't know how much more proof that you need than that, except this is a positive lie. I mean, you can change the hat on who killed Kennedy and why, but it's still a tragedy. Or change the hat and on who did what with 9/11, it's still a tragedy. This is a positive lie. People don't want to give it up. But the fact is, if you really love truth, then the bitterest truth is better than the sweetest lie. And if you have cancer, you want to know. So what we have here, Steve, is the most historic event in human history isn't putting a man on the moon. It's faking it by the most powerful nation on earth, deceived the world and their own people, and according to eyewitnesses who I've interviewed, they murdered Apollo astronauts who would not cooperate. Now I'm talking to the relatives of dead Apollo astronauts who told me they were murdered by the CIA. So we have a country that's faking the moon landing, embezzling the money, and murdering their own people to keep it a secret. And you have naive people defending the glorious moon landings. That is more historic than if they actually went, which means we have this great truth not known to mankind, right? Now, if in your neighborhood, Steve, one child disappears every month and it's been going on for 50 years, should you say, well, it's just one of those things? What can you do? No, we have a government who's faking the moon landings, killing their own president, according to the dead man's relatives, faking 9/11, according to 3,000 engineers, faking the beginning of war, according to the defense secretary of the Vietnam War. They completely contrived the beginning of the Vietnam War that led to murdering tens of thousands of their own people. That's the government we have. So the truth about the moon landing fraud better come out, otherwise they're just going to keep doing the same thing and worse.
The government wants people to think that you're just far out there, that you're crazy, and that this stuff is just absolutely unbelievable. I've seen you talk about the numbers of articles that pop up when you type in, is the moon landing faked? And whether it's on YouTube or somewhere else, the people that are defending it and really trying to tear down the arguments that you're making. But you had irrefutable proof in terms of something that NASA sent you by accident. I want to take the audience back because this almost got you killed, probably. And I want to take them back to, how did that come into your possession? What was it? And what happened as soon as you had it?
Well, I was a journalist, and I met somebody who worked for the space program with second highest clearance to von Braun, the rocket designer. He said he edited a memo between von Braun and the Pentagon that warned them that they were not going to go to the moon before the end of the 1960s, which was Kennedy's goal. He says the likelihood of us going on the first attempt is only 1 in 10,000, and that they bluffed. So this gentleman inspired me to make my movie called A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Moon. You can see it for free on the homepage of Sibrel.com. As Providence would have it, I met somebody who builds rockets for NASA, who knows the moon missions are fake, who gave me $1 million to produce this movie. Now, I contacted NASA and I said I'm doing a movie about the Apollo moon missions, which is true. I wasn't about to tell them, hey, I think it's fake. Please send me all the evidence you got. But I did say, send me everything, every still picture, every video, and every film clip from just the first mission. I figured, Steve, if they faked it, they're more likely to have made a mistake the first time they faked it, because they never faked it before. And as I'm going through all this footage, which is the same thing over and over again, there's only like 20 pictures of an astronaut on the surface of the moon, believe it or not, and very little footage of it, and no originals. In fact, they destroyed intentionally all the original footage. How about that? Right before it's to be transferred to HD for IMAX. And I start going through, and no one had ever asked for everything but me. Most reporters were doing their stories or anniversary commemorations. They got the footage they needed from the first few reels. I went through all of them. And lo and behold, second to the last, I found a reel that when I popped it in said, "Do not show to the public." And even though I asked for unedited footage, everything was pre-edited, except this tape and one other tape. And they are faking being halfway to the moon using a circular window of the spacecraft and making it look like the Earth floating in space. It's very ingenious.
Listen now as Houston Control initiates a conversation with the crew, only to find them too preoccupied with the behind-the-scenes trickery to respond. Moments pass, and the oversight is picked up on by the clandestine third party, who quickly prompts them with talk. Immediately, Neil Armstrong speaks.
Hello, Apollo 11. Houston, Goldstone says that the TV looks great. Over. Okay, Roger. We're mapping in on Earth.
Again, the illusion they are attempting to create is the Earth at a distance to demonstrate their far journey from it and their ability to survive passing through the Van Allen radiation belts. Understand, too, that only about 20 seconds of this raw footage was ever broadcast to the public, and these conversations discussing their deception were believed to be private. Until now. Here they discuss that these television transmissions were in fact not broadcast live as everyone believed. They were first screened and edited for playback later.
Roger, Neil. We just wanted a narrative such that we can, when we get the playback, we can sort of correlate what we're seeing. Thank you very much.
Here they discuss the fact that they have turned out the lights and have blocked out sunlight from entering the spacecraft through the other windows as to not cause any reflected light to fall onto the spacecraft's wall in the foreground.
Okay, very good. Well, we shut out the sun coming in some of the other windows into the spacecraft, so it's looking through the number one window under it, any reflected light.
The reason this was done is so that the truth of the matter would not be revealed. It is this. Though the federal government would have you believe that this is a view of Earth from a distance out of the spacecraft's window as it nears the moon, it is not. What they have ingeniously done is placed the camera at the back of the spacecraft and centered the lens on a circular window in the foreground, outside of which it is completely filled with the Earth in low orbit. The circumference of the window then appears to be the diameter of the Earth at a distance, with the darkened walls of the spacecraft appearing to be the blackness of space around it. That is why they wanted the interior dark and blocked out the sun from entering through the other windows. Here you can see the extruded window, probably 2 inches thick at the bottom. This is because the Earth's shine is coming in at a downward angle. It also causes the Earth to appear to be an irregularly shaped circle, for you are seeing the outside of the window at the bottom and the inside of the window at the top, which together form 2 different sized halves of a circle. Subsequently, this take was never used. As they perfected the shot, a crescent-shaped piece of black material was inset slightly into the window to create the illusion of the Earth's terminator line dividing night and day. It is uncannily convincing. During this segment, intended to be edited and played back later for the worldwide television audience, dated July 18th, 1969, Neil Armstrong condemns himself as he states that he is 130,000 miles out, or halfway to the moon, as the NASA flight log also states on this date, when he is in reality in low Earth orbit of a few hundred miles.
Roger, Houston, Apollo 11. Calling in from about 130,000 miles out.
Here, during another segment, also intended to air after review, Neil Armstrong falsely explains to the viewers how the shot is attained by putting the camera's lens to the window's glass, as it would have to be if they were the claimed distance away from the Earth.
We only have one window that has a view of the Earth, and it's filled up with a TV camera.
If the window was completely filled up with a TV camera, as he stated, then an astronaut's arm would not be able to get between the camera and the window, as it obviously does here in this outtake.
South America becomes invisible just off beyond the Terminator or inside the shadow.
You can also notice how the astronaut operating the camera reacted to the mistake by attempting to pan away from it.
Blue gas, see white bands of major cloud formations across the Earth, and
This is a segment that they believed wasn't even being recorded, much less suitable for broadcast, for the lens was being zoomed out and the scene was being changed to that of an interior of the astronauts at work, and apparently the stop button popped back up on the recorder without notice. Here is the diffused work light that they used to see camera controls, but not throw light onto the spacecraft's wall. Here they remove part of the crescent insert. Finally, the iris is opened up, and you can see the real location of the camera and the very bright and near Earth out the window.
And then there's a third track of audio of the CIA telling telling the astronauts not to answer NASA until they count off 4 seconds of dead air, because they were in Earth orbit. And if they were in Earth orbit, the conversation would be like this: hello, how are you? Well, I'm fine. How are you? Yeah, not too bad. But they're supposed to be 130,000 miles away with light speed there, light speed back, going through all the analog equipment. They estimated 4 seconds. So they counted off 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you hear the CIA tell Neil Armstrong in a private earpiece, talk. Because he heard the question right away, but they said, don't answer right away. 1, 2, 3, 4, now answer. We have that on the tape too. When I found that and saw that 3.5 years into the 7-year $1 million production, I'm like, oh my gosh, they actually did fake the moon landing. And I became terrified. I had a blind roommate, I had a toddler son, and I have this 80-year-old source at NASA who I've apparently put in danger. I called him up, and this is the guy who, read the memo that said they're not going to be able to go to the moon. And I'm like, won't believe what I found. I found them faking part of the moon mission right in front of your eyes. The lights come up, and it's a fake model of the Earth. They're pretending to be halfway to the moon from Earth orbit. And he's like, well, Bart, I told you. And I'm like, no, you don't understand. They really didn't go to the moon. He's like, well, Bart, I told you. I guess I wanted irrefutable proof, and I figured I'd never have it. But to my surprise, I did find it.
What was the moment that you knew or thought the CIA is on to me?
Yeah, it was the day that I found the tape. It was a Wednesday, and I went to church to get advice from the elders what to do. And there were 300 cars in the parking lot, and mine was the last one leaving. And I drove past this business that closes at sundown, and it was hour and a half or so past sundown, and they were backed into the driveway and immediately pulled out when I went by them. And I'm like, oh, they were waiting for me. Why would they be in that business's, driveway that had been closed for an hour and a half, backed in so they could pull out quickly? And why would they pull out not after the 300 cars behind me went, but, me? And so I said, oh, they were waiting for me. So I just pulled over to the side of the road and said, I'm not going anywhere until this guy's in front of me. And I sat there a couple of minutes. He finally passed me, so I decided to follow him. Know the enemy. He gets on the parkway going to town. I get on the parkway going to town. And I pull up alongside the guy. It's like, who is this person? And I don't know if you've ever seen those documentaries of the great white shark. They hang a piece of meat on the side of the boat. It leaps out, and you got that, saucer-sized eye. That eye is soulless. It doesn't care if that's a cow or your mother or your daughter or your grandmother. It doesn't care. It has no compassion. And that's how this guy looked. Never seen it in a human being before. I've only seen it in rogue CIA agents, and it wasn't. I would see it a couple other times after that. And as soon as we looked at one another, everything on my car died. The engine, the radio, the lights, it was as if it had been zapped. A military friend said it was zapped, an EMP type of magnetic pulse, either from a satellite or on their car. And I ended up being chased on foot by two or three other cars. I hailed a taxi, went to a safe house that had a copy of the tape, went all the way from Nashville to CNN. I'm surrounded by the police. I say, am I free to go? I go to the back alley to give the tape to a colleague through the back door. I'm surrounded by unmarked vans.
That CNN facility in Atlanta, and it's huge. And so I can imagine you on the front steps trying to get in, and they're not letting you in. But you go around the backside, and the CIA has police officers on their payroll, I guess, who are working for them and doing their bidding, and they drug you. What did that look like?
They had an unmarked white van. They had, I think, two patrol cars and two or three motorcycle cops and the van. They first handcuff me, and then I hear them say, "Where's the thing?" "Oh, I thought he had the thing." "No, he's got the thing. Where's the thing?" And I'm like, "Oh, what's the thing?" The thing was like this white bracelet, kind of like you get at a rock concert or when you go in the hospital. And they put it around my wrists, and they're handling it with rubber gloves. It was some type of drug that was absorbed through the veins in my wrist. And shortly thereafter, I start, seeing spots before my eyes, start vomiting. Fortunately, there was a lawyer who I guess wanted to have a CNN center address, and all that he could afford was a back alley entrance, and some box office. But he comes out right when I'm being illegally arrested, and I tell him, I work for NBC, I'm being illegally arrested, these big videotapes have proof the moon missions are fake, here's my name, here's the executive producer's name, and so forth and so on. And had that guy not shown up, I might not be here giving this interview today.
I mean, they very easily could have killed you, but you're being detained. And there's laws in this country about being detained and when you are supposed to get put in front of a judge if you're going to have charges put against you. They didn't do that.
The laws that apply to someone arrested, like you have to be given the right to a lawyer, you have to be given a phone call, and you have to see a judge within 48 hours. That's why there's night court. All those rights or privileges apply to someone who's arrested. But if you're called a terrorist or crazy, then those rules, you don't get advantage of those rules. You can be locked up if you're a terrorist indefinitely. Think of all the people in Cuba who have been locked up for 15 years without a charge. It's unbelievable. And then if you're considered to be crazy, they can lock you up for, I think, 5 times longer. They can lock you up for 10 days without seeing a judge instead of 2. And so that's what they do. That's what the Nazi regime, known as the federal government, does.
They don't arrest you. They just call you crazy, and they put you into basically psychiatric custody. Did you think at the time they knew exactly what you had? I mean, you'd had a phone conversation about it where you'd said and indicated that the moon landing was fake. Were they just keeping you locked up there until they could figure out what was on this reel that you had, and they're going to just keep you locked up in the psychiatric ward until that happens?
Yeah, they had heard me talk about the tape over the phone, but they had not seen it. And that was the whole point of arresting me, confiscating the tape, was to view it and to see how damaging it was.
You managed to escape custody. What did that look like? And when did the CIA find out that you were back out and not where they put you?
I escaped their custody in transit from one facility to another. They brought me to some compound that had barbed wire around it, and it was at night, and it was kind of like in pods, like a prison. I used to visit a guy on death row, and it was like pods, building pods, and these walkways which were kind of out in the open. And so while I was being transferred from the receiving pod to the lockdown for who knows how long pod, I realized this is it. This is the only time I'm going to be outside. So I ran into the fog into the night, figuring this hourly employee behind me wasn't about to
Were you
chase me.
handcuffed when that took place, or no handcuffs
No, I
on?
was not. Uh, and I climbed over barbed wire and ran through thorn bushes and creeks all the way to finding a friend in Atlanta who drove me to Nashville. And when I got back, I didn't know, but I looked like I had been flogged. I had scars all over my face and arms, and like people were like, "Bart, what happened to you?" I, it's pretty, and I looked that way for probably 2 months. And but what can you do? They did fake the moon landing, and I feared that they would kidnap my son in order to, I guess blackmail me to give them the original tapes back. So I figured as long as I cannot be held, my son is safe. They can't make that, force that trade. And even the time I think where I eventually was going to show the tape in court, the courtroom caught on fire, so I couldn't show it. I don't know if I mentioned that in
And
the
that
book.
was when you were back in custody again, awaiting that court hearing to prove that you're not crazy, that you have this evidence against them. You talk about in the book, and this is straight out of a movie, but you talk about in the book basically the men in black that are walking into this facility when you're trying to explain what's going on to the orderly who's taking care of you, and you're drugged and you don't know exactly what's going on. People don't believe that this stuff happens, but it happened to you. Tell me about that story of the men in black coming to see you.
They came into my room about 1:30 in the morning and said, "Hey, Mr. Sibrel, we want to talk with you." And they were wearing hospital scrubs. I think they assumed that everybody in that facility would wear that type of uniform, but in fact, it was so modern, it was plain clothes. So that was out of place. They didn't actually work there. They kind of made a mistake on their wardrobe selection. And then they wouldn't talk to me in my room, like they thought there might be some hidden microphone in there. They said, "No, we don't want to talk here, like it's not secure." So they took me down these corridors in the middle of the night to what appeared to be the employee cafeteria. And they asked me all these questions, like, they took my blood pressure. They asked me, "Am I on any medicine or whatever?" And if they were employees of the facility, they would know what medicine I was on. And they seemed very encouraging, like, "You're doing good. Hang in there." One guy kind of looked like you. He was a young black guy, military kind of look. Uh, I think the older guy was kind of about 45, white, and he had on a watch that said United States Marines. And as best as I can tell, these guys were what's called the MCIA, Marine Corps Intelligence Activity Department. And they were there checking in on me because they were concerned. They were on a different team, a godly team, a righteous team, a good guy team, that the people who faked the moon landing, who abducted me, were not on. So that gave me the impression there's a civil war going on in the government under the radar that both sides agreed we'll just let it slide. Probably, since at least the Kennedy administration, surely many people in the government knew that that was a coup, but were afraid of what would happen. Would it destabilize America for that to be brought into court, to bring President Johnson into court and throw him into jail? What would that do for America's reputation and stability? So maybe they agreed to let that slide. Who knows? But there is a civil war going on. I've met the bad guys who have that shark-like, compassionless eye, and I met the good guys who work for the United States Marines, who are sent in to, rescue me, check in on me in the middle of the night after the other side detained me.
Are you concerned right now that the CIA still wants to kill you, to silence you? Because you've been able to be very vocal, especially recently, about this. And I wonder what your feelings are about, is somebody coming for me?
I don't worry about it. I think I'm too high profile. If something mysterious happened to me, It might make a martyr out of me, prove me all the more right. Most of what I have to say has been said. Most of the evidence has been presented, and people can, view it the way that they want.
Do you think President Obama, President Trump, that they're privy to inside information about whether or not the moon landing happened? Or do you think that they've been fooled just like everybody else by these clandestine agencies?
That depends on the president. I would say, of course, George Bush Sr., who was a CIA director. I mean, how bizarre is that? CIA director becomes president? Not a good thing. And so I'm sure he knew. Reagan probably did not know. Clinton found out. In fact, on page 156 of his book, My Life, he basically says he now believes the moon landings are fake. And but that was something he didn't know at first. Bush Jr., I don't think he knew. He was pretty clueless. Obama, sad to say, he was the last person I voted for. I haven't voted since then. And what would that be, the 2008 election? I voted for Obama, and it looks like he might have actually been a CIA asset. The CIA put somebody in office. So I'm sure he knew. He made fun of it in kind of a flippant way. So that basically calling people crazy if they thought the moon landings are fake, in a way that is reminiscent of how the CIA tries to turn tables on people and tries to make the innocent person receive their own guilt. So, and then Trump, I suspect Trump knows, but is reluctant to tell. He wants the dollar to strengthen. He wants the stock market to be strong. If the truth came out, the dollar would probably drop, the stock market would drop. But if he really wants to reform the federal government, what better way than to show the public that they were duped? I mean, they weren't just duped once, they were duped 6 times in a row, played for suckers. People were murdered, money was embezzled, and these evil people will win if the truth isn't substituted for the lie. And so you have to be willing to cut off a gangrene limb to save the body. You can't keep having the moon landing fraud out there. It's going to be the country's demise eventually. You have to stand up and do what's right. And then it really boils down to right and wrong, whether someone believes in God. God is truth and the devil is lies. Apollyon, the father of lies, mankind's greatest accomplishment. I mean, don't you find that ironic?
Oh, I
And,
definitely do. Definitely do. Let me
and
ask you about Barack Obama, because I was 18 years old in 2008 during that election. It was the first election I ever voted in. And I thought at the time that this guy came out of nowhere. I grew up in a kind of religious, almost cult section where they were saying that he was the Antichrist because he was so well spoken. And I didn't really buy that piece of it, but he did come out of nowhere. First term senator. You made the assertion here that he may have been propped up by a clandestine agency, maybe the CIA, who controls the media. What evidence do you point to as you say something like that to insinuate that he might have been propped up by the CIA?
well, if someone says, what evidence do I have that John F. Kennedy was killed by the CIA? I would say watch the 5-part series, The Men Who Killed Kennedy. It's, 5 45-minute documentaries that lay out photographs and detail and eyewitness testimony. Becomes pretty clear the CIA killed Kennedy. I heard an assessment by experts who studied it. I haven't studied it. But on hearing their expert testimony and looking back on Obama's administration, it does appear that he was potentially a CIA asset, CIA agent himself, so that they could have control over the presidency. The guy was, a great orator, extremely intelligent, articulate, and as far as an appearance of American prestige, I'd much rather have him than Bush Jr. But That doesn't mean he's not potentially evil, right? There can be intelligent, articulate, evil people too. And maybe him being the first black president shielded him a little bit because they could always say any criticism is racist or whatever. But I voted for him, and I feel like I was deceived. Just like I voted that the moon landings were real and later changed my mind. No, I think they're fake. And at first, I'm like, give the guy a chance. But later, it seemed like he was deliberately. I mean, the simplest thing that you can point to, kind of like in 9/11, the simplest thing you can point to if something's wrong about that is Building 7, which half of Americans don't even know existed. A third building, 47 stories tall, collapsing, right? How do you explain that the same day without a plane hitting it? I mean, come on, there's something not right with this picture. In the case of JFK, it's that the assassin was assassinated, so it never went to trial. That's a big red flag. They killed the guy who allegedly killed him, so the show's over. That's suspicious. And in Obama's case, do you realize both times he won the election, which would be his swearing in on 2009, January 20th, he was sworn in twice, both the public one and then one in secrecy. So that's never been done in the history of the United States. Why was Obama re-sworn in each time, twice, in secrecy? And there's not an audio or video recording of it available. There's a transcript, but how do we know that that's what really happened? So something's going on there. In fact, I think the first time he was sworn in, he was, I will be president, what's the guy's name? Roberts, who was the Supreme Court Justice, said that you will be president for the United States. And Obama stopped him and corrected him and said, of the United States. Now, these are lawyer people we're dealing with. For the United States means he's like a surrogate president, a substitute president, you see, for rather than of. And Obama kind of corrected him. He wanted to maintain power, apparently, and corrected him and said it the way that it was supposed to have been said. But then they immediately went into the basement of the White House and redid it. And then 4 years later, they went into the basement of the White House after the public swearing in and did another secret oath. Never happened in the history of America. You know, what's going on with that guy? I think there's some legal loophole. He's legally like the secretary of the president of the United States, but not actually the president, something like that. And I think the CIA is behind him. What can you do?
How do you think the CIA is dealing with Trump? Is he maybe an operative of them as well? He had an interesting rise to fame and power. Could it be Obama 2.0?
No, he's kind of like a wild card, and I'm sure that description fits him well. Again, I pray for all of my leaders. I stopped voting. The Bible says a soldier of Christ does not get involved in civilian affairs. And there's nothing more civilian affairs than politics. Turn on NPR, it's all about politics. Politics have had 6,000 years of civilization to save the world, and in the last 100 years of politics, there's been more genocide of more millions of people than the entire history of the world before it. It doesn't work. So, and we don't have a democracy anyway. 90% of Americans wanted GMO labeling, and the president vetoed it. So how can one person veto the will of 90% of Americans and it be called a democracy, right? That's not a democracy. And then they do these executive orders. I, an individual, am going to ban gas stoves. Biden did that. How can one individual do that? That's, all these things are illegal. In Trump's case, if you are in film and theater circles, like I'm a filmmaker, I studied theater as well, and acting, there's something called a line reading. Let's say, Steve, you're my actor, I'm the director, and you're not saying the line quite the way that I want you to. If I say it this way, and I basically do it for you, and then say parrot it back, right? That's called giving you a line reading, and that's considered an insult to your acting skills, right? Say it this way: I hate you, and then you imitate me, or whatever the line is. So I'm supposed to tell you something like, well, I want you to think, your father beating you. So when you say I hate you, that's what the line means. You don't think about that. So the Illuminati people, whoever they are, deep state, whatever you want to call them, who run the world, rigging elections is like a line reading. That's beneath them. They don't have to rig elections. Although it is interesting that George Soros' company manufactured 1/3 of the voting machines in the United States of America. So they could if they wanted to. But rigging votes is beneath them. They control the world, and they control what people think. They release, Trump grabbed the crotch of this woman or whatever, and then 2 points come off, and they release, he was called somebody an N-word back in New York, and this, and comes down another 5 points. They control it that way. It's beneath them to actually rig voting machines. At least it was in 2016. And Trump had to win, I think, 5 battleground states. And he had to win all 5 of them. When they said the odds of that were like 2%. But he did. And he won each of the states by like 1,000 votes. Really close. So like he didn't spend a penny more than he had to and everything. So I think with him winning in 2016, they miscalculated. And he barely won. And they made a mistake. That's why Hillary Clinton didn't come out. And I mean, people are flying all over the country to come to her convention the night of the election, and she disses them and doesn't show up until 8 o'clock the next morning and congratulates Trump. She was having fits of rage. They really thought they made a mistake. And George Soros said a few months later that will not happen in 2020. Now, how they stop that from happening, I don't know. Or maybe Trump didn't get enough votes. I don't know. I don't have an opinion about the election. I never looked into it. I know they could rig it if they wanted to, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they did. Now we have Trump in 2024. And we have, if you believe we're in the last days, which the Bible says more people who are believers will have visions of the future, there was a guy who said Trump would be assassinated, an attempt, and the bullet would strike his ear. He said it 10 months before it happened. And as best as I can tell, they used something called smart ammunition. And which basically means when the person, the gunman, pulls the trigger halfway through, the laser beam, and in this case GPS coordinates go on where that bullet is to hit, probably right between the eyes. And the moment he pulled the trigger, Trump moved, and the GPS on the bullet, which has fins on it, like a missile. So you can point it almost 90 degrees off, and it'll swarm around and go to where you first pulled your trigger. So I think they used smart ammunition, and when he pulled the trigger, it went to that was the very same moment that Trump moved an inch, and the bullet went to the previous GPS coordinates. So if it hit his ear, his head was here, trigger pull. It went like that. And then they tried again at the golf course, and these people don't want to embarrass themselves. If they keep trying to kill Trump and keep failing, is going to make them look foolish and amateurs. So I think what they've decided is they're just going to let it ride. After all, it's only 3 years, right? They've controlled the presidency most of the time. They control most of Congress. They got to take a loss every now and then. They miscalculated in 2016. They, serendipity or something happened. They didn't get him in 2 tries of assassination. They're not going to keep trying, just going to make them look like amateurs. I think they're just going to let it ride out, and then they're going to take it over. The problem is there are events coming that are potentially, global, like a meteor strike, that the president would know about. If you believe in divine intervention, it may serve some, providential purpose that Trump not have won in 2020, but serves from 2025 through 2029 instead. Even though, maybe he was cheated, I have no idea, maybe not. The Bible says that even sinners, like Nebuchadnezzar, was a big pagan person, and Trump may or may not be really a Christian, I have no idea. But that doesn't mean he cannot be an instrument of God, or Obama couldn't be an instrument of God. So something's coming up. I believe an asteroid is going to strike in 2029 that they know about. They may fake one before then, and who knows what they're up to. But strange things are coming down the pike. They may even tell the truth about the moon landing fraud to cause a civil war. That was one of the NBC News director's concerns. One of them was going to broadcast it, and the other one thought it was a bad idea, that it would cause such civil unrest if the American public knew that they had been duped about the moon landing. So who knows what's coming down the pike? I don't vote. I don't have any ill feelings toward Obama or Trump or Clinton or Biden. I pray for them all. I wish them well. I pray that they do what is right. The most important scripture is, what good is it to gain the whole world and forfeit your soul? You can own everything, every piece of land, every skyscraper, every diamond, the space shuttle, every airplane, and if you don't make it into eternal life, it's all meaningless. Anything less than immortality is a complete waste of time. And that's what these people who faked the moon landing, killed Kennedy, did 9/11, did. They're gaining the world and losing their soul. So I fight every day to be right with God, stay right with God. And the fact is, the faking of the moon landing is a profound spiritual lesson that mankind's greatest accomplishment is a fraud. My film, again on the homepage of Sibrel.com, opens up with the Tower of Babel to reach the heavens. What is going to the moon, right? And it was never finished. Jesus says to start a tower and to not finish it means you're a fool. Then we showed the Titanic. They put in publicity, the ship that God himself could not sink. Never made one voyage. And then we showed Nixon. When he knew they weren't on the moon, he nevertheless said, putting a man there is second in greatness only to God making the universe. So this is a blasphemy, faking the moon landing. And I pray, the truth comes out, because it's probably going to take divine intervention for it to do so.
Well, people need to go and read your book and go to your website and look at this footage. I came in as someone who thought, hey, maybe we did it, maybe we didn't. And after seeing your interview with Candace Owens and then getting your book for myself and reading it, my eyes were opened up that it's far more than just the moon landing. There's so much that's going on, and your own personal story in it as well. It is well worth people's time to go and read your book. So I'll give you the last word. Where can people find you? You've mentioned the website a couple of times, but one last time here for us, and the last word.
Yeah, sure. It's just S as in Sam, I-B as in boy, R-E-L, Sibrel.com. The book has 17 interactive video links. So you basically read a chapter, and then it says go to link 1, which is at Sibrel.com. And I back up. I show the footage of them faking being halfway to the moon. We show the shadows intersecting. We show the NASA employee saying the technology to go to the moon has not been invented yet to this day. And all of this is backed up and on the homepage of Sibrel.com.